Good evening. Good evening, everyone, and welcome to tonight's webinar. For anyone that is joining us from Ontario, we certainly hope you had a good Family Day weekend. In some parts of the world right now, they are celebrating Carnival, Mardi Gras, as we get over the winter hump and closer to spring. I'm very excited to welcome you all to this conversation, whether you are returning or it's your first time. Around last year, this time, we hosted the first Retirement Elsewhere themed webinar, which was focused on Belize and Costa Rica. And it was so well received that we took some feedback and decided to bring it back. One such feedback was to touch on the US Sunbelt, and also to go into a bit more detail around the tax and the legal considerations around such a move of living outside Canada, whether part-time or on a full-time basis. And that's why we're here today. Today's agenda, we've got three persons that are going to be presented, and they each have lots to share with you. And so realistically, I do want to set the expectation that we're anticipating the Q&A section will likely start at 8 p.m. as opposed to the usual 7:45 p.m. Once we complete the Q&A, the question and answer section, and the formal segment, then I usually hang around for a few more minutes for an Ask Me Anything segment that could be related to what we discussed today or just anything of a general nature. And for any questions that we were not able to get through tonight, they can be discussed later in the week by connecting with myself by phone, email, or LinkedIn. And you can also put questions in the survey that we do send out after the webinar, which is also where we get some of the ideas for future webinar topics based on what attendees like yourself share. If you are joining for the first time, and welcome. My name is Orlando Lopez. I am an investment advisor and financial planner here at RBC Dominion Securities. It's going on 3 years now, over 3 years that I've been with RBC Dominion. I've been in the industry for over 13 years, going to be 14 soon. And outside of that, I've had experience teaching finance at York University. I had a prior career in IT, so I'm always happy to sort of bring all these different experiences to the conversation. And in my current role, I work with individuals or families just navigating the financial decisions that they have to make with their current needs as well as future needs, such as what we're discussing here, which is retirement and the lifestyle that people want to create. So before we get into our speakers, I want you to get ready for liftoff, because we're going to take you on a trip tonight. And I need you to strap on your seatbelts. I need you to hold on tight, especially as we gain altitude. The further we get into the conversation is the more attention to detail that you will need. So by all means, have something close by to take notes. Try to reduce distractions so you don't miss anything. And it's helpful for the panelists to get to know a bit about who's in the audience and just a general sense of your area of focus. So we want to get started with a little bit of a Slido poll with just a few questions related to the topic. And in order to participate, you can use your phone and just take a picture of that QR code, or you can go to slido.com and input that number 2187 333. So I will pull that up as well here. So again, use if you're on a smartphone or if you're on a laptop, you can just open it on a browser, go to slido.com and input the number 2187 333. And the first question that we were curious, like to know is, here we go. This is the first one. Do you currently own any real estate in the United States? So yes or no, do you own real estate in the United States? So we've got 91%, 92% no. Give it a little bit more. And then the next question, do you plan to buy real estate in the United States in the future? So that might mean whether you already own and you're planning to buy a second one. So whether second or first, it would still apply. Do you plan to buy real estate in the United States in the future? Coming at about 80%. Right. And the next question, what is your main goal with property in the United States? Is it for investment purposes? Is it for lifestyle, vacation, recreation, or a bit of both? What is your primary goal from that? I think so for our panelists, pretty much we want to have our cake and eat it, which is not a bad thing. So both, right? Investment as well as the lifestyle, leisure element of it. And what state you currently own in, what do you own already, or would you like to own property in? So this one you type in and it would sort of show. So Minnesota, Florida, Arizona. So based on size, the larger, the more persons that are choosing that state. Georgia's in there, Nevada. So definitely help in the conversation and knowing what state most persons are. First of all, South Carolina, there. Right. And almost there. Out of curiosity, is it snowing outside your window right now? So when I was grabbing my coffee, I usually do that before these webinars. Yeah, there's a lot of snow.
No,
So
not in my
except for,
window.
I know, I was gonna say Ozzy can't vote on this one. She's in Florida, so you are not eligible to. So okay. So there's a couple that might be, depending on where you are in Ontario, might have already started or not yet. So there's a lot of people that it's snowing outside their window right now. And the last question, do you currently work with an advisor that's able to help you with such a goal? So with a goal of realizing acquisition of real estate in the United States. There's some complexity, so we definitely can. Well, for those who said no, you are in the right place. And appreciate participating in that because it's definitely going to help sort of the direction of the conversation. Now, as I said before, an esteemed panel today, and I have the pleasure of being connected with some of our panelists, from past up to present, starting with Ozdi Marie Cardenas, whom I've known since 2000, when we both worked in a different country and in different industries. So at the time, we both lived in Montego Bay, Jamaica, worked in the IT sector, where I was a programmer, software developer, junior, my first sort of real job in corporate world. And Ozzy was my boss. Was my first real boss in corporate world. And I think it speaks volumes of her character that we are still in touch. She gave me some good reviews. So,
I did. And you have been
yeah.
doing amazing.
Thank you, Ozzy. Thank you. And now Ozzy lives in Florida and practices real estate, and it will be here to share her knowledge about the market, that market in particular. And it's just one example because we know, as that came out in that sort of poll, that for some people it's other states, right? So we're just using this as an example. There's we can't kind of touch on everything all in one shot. And we also have Ann Harvey, who is a mortgage specialist at RBC, with a focus on financing U.S. properties for those who already own or wanting to do an equity takeout, or those looking to buy a property. And we've got Shlomi is a lawyer who works closely with many of our RBC clients, navigating that process of real estate considerations as a Canadian. So without further ado, I'm going to pull up the slides for Ozzy. Ozzy, thank you for taking the time out of warm, sunny Florida to be with us here.
Thank you. It's a pleasure. So, yes, my name is Aussie Cardenas. I am a real estate agent here in the South Florida, in the United States. I work for a brokerage, my realty group. My broker has 20 plus years of experience in this market, in the South Florida market. And we have 300 plus realtors in different cities through the state. So definitely, if I cannot help any other of my partners, they can definitely help you in your move. And even if you are not moving to South Florida, I'm only licensed here in South Florida, but I can definitely help you to find the right partner in the state where you are looking to buy or invest your money. Okay. So I guess the question you all may have right now is why, how, when, and where to invest, right? So to help you make this decision, let's start with the why to invest in the real estate in South Florida in this moment. So basically, South Florida is everybody knows that it has a broad employment and business opportunities for sure. It offers like a great family environment and also a unique lifestyle. Okay, that would be the why from my point of view. Now, how you get there? So basically, this is very high level. We have Anne and we have John that are gonna go in detail as to how to get there, but just high level, having the right documents requested by the bank, that will be your first step, right? Then you need a valid passport and visa to enter the US. That you definitely need that if you're gonna be investing in the US. And then you have to choose the right realtor. I will hope it's me. That will definitely put you in a good spot and it's gonna give you all the direction that you will need to get into the market. So when you're gonna invest in real estate, when you can make the decision to invest in real estate in South Florida, I would say it's not a secret for anyone that real estate is the best market where you can put your money. Definitely now is a good moment for buyers. We are in a buyer's market. I know there is a lot of speculation about prices, interest rate, and everything, and what's going to happen next. But right now, the buyers are in advantage because sellers are offering ton of incentive for closing costs. Basically, they are paying all the closing costs. In addition to, if you are going into a new property where you have like builders, they are offering incentive, like, grace to the house, closing costs, and many other incentives that can definitely help you to get the property that you are, dreaming for. So in addition to that, we as Realtor have access to 90,000 plus active inventory here in Florida. That's just what we have in our system. But we also have access to all the builders across the state that are building daily hundreds of homes, new construction homes. They are amazing. They are in gated community, non-gated community. They have a lot of amenities like pools, gyms, uh, places where you can actually cultivate your own food. There are a lot of options for new construction. And we have access to all that information. If you work with the realtor that knows the area, definitely that will be the person to guide you where to find the community that offer the best in money and also in amenities. Okay. So the next point will be um, I went through the how, the when. So I just want to talk about where to invest. So Lando, you can move to the next slide. Okay. So we have different cities where we by tradition, we know that a lot of Canadian citizens have been moving, relocating, investing where the snowbirds are moving to every year, right? That have been happening for decades. So the first one that everybody knows about is Miami. Miami is definitely the city where everybody wants to invest. Why is that? Well, Miami is really expensive. It's basically 18%. The prices are 18% higher than the rest of the state, but still is the one that offers the best return of investment for investors, right? That's basically where you can have a is a favorite destination for everyone if you are talking about Airbnb, for example, right? And also we have access to the three major airports in the area where you can get to different countries. So I think Miami is an option for everyone, right?
Is FFL Fort Lauderdale? Is that Fort Lauderdale by chance?
Yes, Fort Lauderdale will be the next
That's
one.
more expensive than Miami.
Oh, yeah. No, it's not more expensive. Sorry, 1 second. It's not more expensive than Miami.
Okay.
Remember, the prices that we are seeing right now, they are for single family homes,
Mm.
townhomes, condos, right? So it's everything mixed in this price. If we are
Okay.
talking condos, you can go like 150 to 100,000 less than what you see in there.
I see.
Okay. So this is just a medium
The
for all
aggregate,
type
yeah.
of properties. Yes.
Understand.
Yeah. So yeah, well, usually what happened with Fort Lauderdale has a lot of coast, beaches, right? So yes, it's a little bit more expensive in that sense. Uh-huh. Then we have other cities like Palm Beach. That's where I'm located. I strongly recommend Palm Beach. We have Port St. Lucie. We have Palm Coast, Orlando, Daytona Beach, Jacksonville. As you can see, the north that you go is the more cheaper that it can get. Okay. But definitely all these cities have something in common. They have great weather. We have sandy beaches everywhere, right? And we have a ton of amazing property that you can choose from.
Yeah, and the price point will certainly surprise a lot of people on the call because, yeah, we don't really see these. And I know you have to do the conversion. There's that exchange, probably 34% is on the exchange rate right now. But yeah, seen in the 200s, the median
Right.
price is not common.
Mm-hmm. That's correct. So we can go to the next slide. So where do you start, right? That would be the next question. So the first thing would be to get financing. If you are buying cash, well, that's not a problem. But if you need help with that financing, then you definitely need to make sure that you get pre-qualified with one of the banks, and it's gonna talk about that, or you can get like a private lender. Okay, that would be the first step. The second step will be the research, where to invest, because Florida is really huge, right? So you need to work with your realtor, the realtor that, and you can work with one, two, three realtors just to know the market. I won't say you need to work with the three of them all the way through the process, but at least to know the different areas, you should be able to choose one, two, three realtors that can, share their expertise in the area. And then once you decide exactly where you want to invest, then you just, focus in one realtor, work with that person, and that will definitely get you to where you need. And then the next step, sorry, I'm a little busy. The next step will be a review all the inventory that we have access to that I mentioned already. It's not only what we have in our system, we also have a new construction that are not in the system. We also have sell by owner that we also have access to those systems. And if you know the area and you farm your area, you will definitely know a lot of those properties that are not in the market, but they are for sale. And that would be also a good option for buyers. And then the last step will be to make an offer. And for that, then you definitely need a realtor, right? And that person can also engage you with one of the title company that will definitely help you with, researching the title, make sure the property has no liens, no open permits. So definitely that's another step in the process that is very important, that you work with the right person.
Yeah, appreciate it. No, lots of good info, and definitely navigate that environment. Yeah, you always don't want to do it on your own.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Okay, so the financing part, let's probably go deeper into that part, and I'll give you control so that you can share your screen. There you go.
Thank you. Can you see that, Orlando?
Yes.
Okay, perfect.
Not in full screen? Yeah, there we go. Wonderful.
Perfect. Okay. So thanks for having me here today. I'm really excited to speak to everybody today about how RBC Bank can help you with your US financing dreams. So I'm going to go through this pretty quickly because I know that Shlomi's got a pretty big presentation and I want you to be able to hear all of that as well. So I would just say that, in the past, we would typically be just lending to snowbirds, but we've realized that our audience has really expanded. And so, we know that you out there are expats, you're frequent shoppers that are looking to spend time in Florida. And leisurely travel people, along with those retired snowbirds. The good thing about RBC Bank is we are a digital bank, so we're 100% virtual. We don't have a bricks and mortar location down there, but which scares some people, but I would say it really does work to our advantage. It allows us to be able to have our clients operate in all 50 states in the US. There's some federal rules in the US that if you have a bricks and mortar location, it really limits the area that you can do business in. So with our business model, you have access to 50,000 ATM machines. It allows you the freedom of moving money back and forth across the border from your RBC bank account on the Canadian side to RBC on the US side without having to do wires. We've got the national coverage, and we are specifically trained to deal with Canadians. So Canadians is the audience that RBC Bank is there to help on the US side. Mouse is not working. There we go. So I just wanted to quickly go over, we do offer bank accounts on the US side. We've offer a premium account and a checking account. So those can help you so that you don't always have to carry US cash with you all the time. You can use your Visa debit card. You can get cash back when you're purchasing something at Target. You can do a cash back there or go to those all-point ATM machines that can help you get access to cash as well. It's as easy as just toggling between our Canadian and our US online banking applications to move money across the border. So from your Canadian US dollar bank account to your US dollar bank account. We offer two different Visa cards. So one is a premium card, the Signature Black Plus card, and we offer the Signature Black card. So one is the Plus card will offer premium points. There's an annual fee with that card. There's a cash back redeem through the rewards points. And there's some travel insurance, trip cancellation insurance, accident coverage, and emergency access to cash and lost luggage coverage there. So, which is different than the US Gold card that's offered on the US side, or sorry, on the Canadian side of the bank. So this is a US dollar card, but it's from a Canadian bank. And so there are going to be some limitations to use that card. Like you can't pay at the pump with that Canadian Visa Gold card. And if you travel outside of the US or around the world, there will be, you know, a conversion fee with that gold card. So if you are a traveler that, you know, you go to other countries and they deal in US dollars, this is the card for you to be traveling with for sure. So we also offer business bank accounts down there as well, just so that you know if you are expanding your business onto the US side. And now onto the financing. So RBC Bank on the US side, we offer Canadians financing solutions, and we use your Canadian credit history and your Canadian income to qualify for that debt on the US side. So that's a biggie because not all banks in the US will help Canadians that way. They usually want the Canadian to have a US credit history established for 2 years, along with US income for 2 years. And if you don't, then they will charge you a foreign national premium. So they treat you like a foreigner. And that fee we've seen between 2 and 4%. So RBC Bank, you know, is really one of the only ones down there that treat the Canadians like this and will use, you know, leverage the credit history, the income, but also the RBC Bank relationship to help qualify for the mortgage. So we can also help Canadians close their mortgage either in the US, so you can sign your mortgage documents in the US, or depending on the state, because some states have rules where you have to be on US soil to close your mortgage. But states like Florida, that seem to be one of the most popular ones through our Slido, you can actually close your mortgage in Canada. And, you know, Shlomi can go through that in more detail as well. His team will help you. You know, we send the documents up to Canada and you just sign them in front of your notary and mail the documents back to us. So we make it very easy for you. So we are the experts in helping Canadians guide you through this US buying process every step of the way. So for mortgages, if it's a primary or a secondary home, like a vacation home is what we mean by that, we can go up to 80% of the value of the property. We do a pre-approval, and we do recommend that you go through the pre-approval process prior to purchasing. We will provide financing on single-family homes, condos, and townhomes. We offer a 3, 5, 7, or a 10-year term mortgage. Interest rate is locked in for the term that you choose, but the amortization is over 30 years, so it keeps the payment nice and low. The big thing about the mortgages on the US side is that there's no prepayment penalty, so the mortgages are open, so you can pay them off at any time and walk away. Any lump sum payment at any time, no penalties. We don't charge that foreign national premium, and we also allow you to put title for this type of property in a non-personal name, so it could be a trust. And then for some existing RBC clients that have, you know, the wealth management relationship, we can also look at some other non-personal title ownership structures, and I'll get into that in a little in a moment. So the other mortgages that we offer are for investment properties. So a lot of you said that you were interested in doing some investment properties. What I would like to say is RBC, I would say, is best at doing the primary and the secondary lending. We view a vacation home as a property where you use that property for personal use between you and your friends and your family for 2 months out of the year. And then you are allowed to rent it out for 10 months out of the year. And if it fits within that structure, then we can view it as a vacation home, which means that you can go up to the 80% and you get the preferred interest rates on a primary or secondary home type of mortgage. For an investment property, we can't go as high on the loan to value. So this would be a property that you're renting out 12 months out of the year, a long-term lease on this property. Single family home, condo, and a townhome are the types of property that we can lend on. We can do a 3, 5, 7, or 10-year term on this as well, but title must be held in a personal name. So for the investment property, it's important to know that for a lending point of view, they're asking you to put title in a personal name for long-term leasing projects. And this one is also amortized over 30 years, but the interest rate is 1% higher on an investment property than it would be for a vacation home. So you can refinance these properties as well, pay them down without any penalties and walk away, and no foreign national premiums for this one either. We also offer a home equity line of credit. So the home equity line of credit, we can also go up to 80%, but this is only offered on a vacation home. So it's not going to be offered for an investment property. So up to 80% of revolving credit, single family home, townhomes, and condos. This is a variable rate offering based off of prime, and you can get a discount off of prime with a good credit score. So depending on how your credit comes into the application, you can get up to 0.5% off of the prime rate. This one, title is held in personal name or a revocable trust, and the monthly payment is interest only on whatever you're drawing on it. So whatever the balance is on the line of credit, you only have to make an interest only payment. It revolves, meaning that you can borrow it and pay it back for the first 10 years. And then after 10 years, if there's still a balance on it, you have to start making a principal and interest payment and pay it down. So there's no penalty on this one either. You can pay it off, walk away anytime. We can refinance any existing properties down there, although it looks like from Slido, most of you are new purchasers. No foreign national premium. And the benefit with this one obviously is the flexibility, right? It gives you instant access to US dollars whenever you need it. But you know, the risk is that it's variable with prime. So there's no locking in the rate on this one. So we mentioned the complex ownership structures. So this is something that we offer our wealth management clients. So everybody would have to be Orlando's clients. So we would, in that case, offer on vacation homes only the option of putting it into something other than the trust or your personal name. So this is done on an exception basis for high net worth clients that have strong relationships with RBC. And the entity must be 100% owned by you personally. So it can't be a layered type of ownership. So through a holdco or through an operating company, it's got to be owned directly by you personally. And the entity is set up for the sole purpose to hold the US property. So no other assets or liabilities are mixed into this entity. It's just there to hold that US property. No other real estate holdings in that whole entity that we set up. And in some states, you're required to register that entity in that state. So here's a sample of some of the types of ownership that we see on our side. So in personal name, there's, you know, different ways that people can hold it. So you can hold it in your personal name alone. You can hold it joint as tenants in common, joints with rights of survivorship, and transfer on death, beneficiary deed, or gift to children. all of those we can lend to. So that's what the green check marks are. We can lend to every one of those. On the trusts, we can lend to a U.S. revocable trust. U.S. revocable. Revocable means that the trust can be, it's living, so it can still be amended. So that we can lend to. Canadian family trusts, we would just want to make sure that it's a revocable trust. Cross-border trusts, we can typically lend to those, no problem. But a cross-border irrevocable trust, we wouldn't be able to lend to that. Under partnerships, so sometimes we see properties being held into partnerships, limited partnerships, we can lend to those, but a two-tiered limited partnership adds that layer in there is too complex, that we wouldn't be able to lend to that. And then under US corporation, a C Corp, we wouldn't be able to lend to because it's viewed more as business lending, and you know, RBC Bank's license to lend is for personal lending purposes only. And so that's what we're really trying to steer away from, is anything that looks too much like a business is something we could lose our license over. So we try to keep it as simple as possible when it comes to the ownership structure. LLCs we've lent to, Canadian corporations we can lend to, as long as it's set up for the sole purpose just to hold that property. Two-tiered corporations are too complex, so we couldn't lend to that. Oops.
Lots of options though. I think that's a key thing to realize, that for everyone on the call, a lot of options in terms of how you can structure it.
Exactly, and that's why it's so important to get the right advice about it, because you know that's you're buying in a foreign country and you really need the right advice. So it's very different from Canada, and you're dealing with two governments. You know, from a tax point of view, you want to make sure you're not going to be double taxed. So the benefits of financing your US property is you're really minimizing that upfront foreign exchange impact. So if you only have to come up with a 20% down payment on closing rather than 100%, it's allowing you to time when you can convert the money to pay down your mortgage on the US side. So it just puts the control in your hands to be able to work with that foreign exchange impact. No prepayment penalties, so you can lump it down whenever you want. US interest rates, I mean, they have been popping up. I would say they're probably floating between, you know, I would say high fives and low sixes right now. They change on a daily basis, so it's not like in Canada where it's kind of secure for a bit. They change every day, and you can't lock in your rate until you actually have an offer of purchase in your hands, and it's about 30 days prior to your closing date. We, as you know, you noticed, there are a wide selection of very affordable properties in the US still available, and so that's a big reason to be purchasing in the US compared to Canada. And refinancing an existing property lets you benefit from the strong US dollar, as well as benefit, as well as the property appreciation since you did purchase. So the difference, there are differences between Canada and the US. The biggest one is really the time that it takes to process the application. I would say qualifying is similar to Canada, but the timeline and the experience is very different than Canada. So things can happen all at the same time in Canada, you know, speeding up what has to be done. But in the US, just due to the federal rules, you know, there are certain things that have to be done at certain times throughout the stage, and they can't be happening at the same time. So minimum 45 days is what we ask for. Application requirements are very similar, except that we need, you know, proof to prove your, have your ID and prove who you are, because we're doing this all virtually. Documentation, I would say there's more documentation on the US side for sure. And down payments are going to be similar. Closing costs in the end are probably going to be similar. And depending on how this is all structured and what your tax advisors say, you might be able to deduct the tax on that mortgage. And that's it for me.
Thank you, thank you. And one thing on one of your earlier slides, I really noticed where you had emerging and eventual snowbirds. So I'm guessing that's a new segment, especially probably post-pandemic, that
Yeah.
you're seeing. So
And
yeah.
I want to say Gen Zs too, right? Because Gen Zs are doing first-time home purchases in the US because they're priced out of the market here.
Yeah,
Yeah.
lots to consider. So we're going up, you know, in terms of altitude, and now we're gonna hand off to Steve. Before everybody starts buying tickets and making offers, you need to hear this part. Important. So not trying to burst the bubble, but I'll hand it off to Steve. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you so much, Orlando. I mean, Anne and Oz, the amazing amount of information, so critical for Canadians looking to take the plunge into the US. For me, I think there may be some overlapping, so I'm going to try to kind of go around the certain points that both Ozzy and Anne kind of addressed, so that we don't drag everybody into the same information twice. Of course, Orlando, a big thank you to you and your team for setting this up and giving us the opportunity to speak to such wonderful, obviously, people that are watching this. I'm controlling this, so hopefully I don't make a mistake. Our firm is just, I'm going to say it now so I don't have to say it at the end, we're a cross-border tax and estate planning and real estate law firm with offices both in Canada and in the US, and more importantly, both Canadian and US attorneys on staff, so that we're able to easily take care and handle these complex questions that the clients may have over time. Sorry, I'm just trying to move slides here. This is a little bit too much. Okay, so we're going to talk about ownership of real estate. Of course, Osdi referenced the title examinations, how important being equipped with the right professionals around you to deal with U.S. real estate law, U.S. real estate terminology, title examination, lead searches, open concept, estoppel letters, notices of assessment. These are all things that we don't typically have to worry about in Canada. We have one offer, it's very easy. We have title attorneys that guarantee the quality of title, and so we move on. You get to the US, which is title insurance driven, and you have to really, really focus on these things. Having the right professional, having the right realtor help you review the initial contract, having the right lawyers and legal team take you through the steps is extremely important. And more importantly, you got to know what are you up for in terms of costs. Not everything is payable by the buyer, not everything is payable by the seller, depending on the counties in which you're looking to purchase, depending on the states in which you're looking to purchase. There may be different customs and obligations. On this upcoming slide, one of the fundamental things that other than worrying about what is in the contract, what is in the offer, what are the dates, what are the inclusions, and what are the exclusions, one of the big things that we absolutely want to always worry about is how to take title. And Anne referenced in one of her last slides, Anne referenced multiple types of ownership structures that the bank would lend to. Here we're going to talk about them, for the reason being is that we're going to show you what works and what doesn't work. We're going to show you what are the tax liabilities associated with each one of these ownership structures. So we have the most popular way of owning title is in one's name alone. Okay, you want to choose buying property alone in your name. You could buy it alone. You could buy it as a tenant in common with a partner. You can buy it as jointly with the right of survivorship. You can buy it as husband and wife, which automatically grants a right of survivorship on the US side. And often enough, we hear about people undertaking some transfers on death or beneficiary deed to children. You'll see that in Florida through the Lady Bird or life estate deeds. You'll see that in Arizona through beneficiary deeds. You'll see it in California through what they like to call the poor man's trust. So we have to be careful because although these things will help deal with certain issues associated with ownership in the US, they will create a slew of tax and estate planning ramifications both on the US and Canadian side. So we want to be extremely careful. Owning property in trusts is extremely popular. As Anne had mentioned, revocable trusts are good, irrevocable trusts cause headaches. Is it a Canadian trust? Is it a US trust? Is it a cross-border trust? These are questions that typically need to be answered prior to making sure that we utilize the structure. And the advantages of trusts are quite important, but the biggest one of them is dealing with the estate ramifications and the tax ramifications of the ownership. Partnerships are typically going to serve investment vehicles, mostly for the purposes of avoiding liability. So if people bought something and the property is up for rent because they can't occupy it or they need to rent it out in order to offset some of the upkeep costs, well, you're exposing a liability component to the equation. This is the United States. Everybody gets sued. Lawsuits are for millions of dollars. So we absolutely want to make sure we're careful about these types of scenarios and we don't get trapped in them. Last but not least is corporations. And although Canadians like corporations, we like the use of corporations. We utilize them very often here in Canada, but in the US, we don't like them that much. The reason being is that the corporations are taxed very favorably in Canada because individual tax rates are so high. But once we go to the US, corporations have a much higher corporate tax rate. And there's other vehicles that achieve the same corporate protection. But here again, even if we're going to talk about corporate ownership, which we'll see a bit later down, we got to choose the right corporation. And again, when we look at what Anne described, we have US corporations, we have Canadian corporations, we have tiered Canadian corporate structures, Canadian and US corporations, one on top of the other stack. And then there's the famous US limited liability company. And although Anne and RBC Bank are happy to lend on these structures, Canadians should stay away from LLCs. Canadians should never find themselves entangled in LLCs unless it's properly crafted structure by a cross-border expert that knows specifically how to utilize the LLCs in the right context. Having said all that, let's talk about a couple of issues that affect Canadians when they purchase property and when they own property in the US. First one being probate. Here's a golden opportunity to let everybody know that despite general perception, your Canadian Ontario will is valid in the state of Florida. It's valid in the state of Arizona. It will be valid in the state of California. So our Canadian wills are valid in the US. But that doesn't mean that because they're valid in the US that they avoid the nasty effects of probate. And probate is a long and expensive legal procedure that basically happens when a person dies owning the property as described by this scenario. And typically probate is a long and expensive drawn process. It could take anywhere between 12 and 24 months to complete, during which time the asset's completely frozen. And depending on the state and county, it could cost almost 3% plus cost and disbursement, so an average of 5% of the fair market value of the asset at the time of death. So in a $300,000 property, you're looking at about $15,000 in about 2 years. So we definitely want to avoid probate. We definitely don't want to have to worry about Canadian wills being probated in the US, but if need be, they're valid. They're completely valid. And that's an important piece of information to retain. Something that happens very often is that, Canadians will buy property in the US. Canadians are sometimes told they should have a US will for their US assets. And I don't personally have a problem with those. What I do have a problem is not making sure that the right advice is given to the clients. Why? Typically, every will that is drafted, one of the first statements in a will is that the testator hereby revokes any and all prior wills executed by him. Typically, when you're doing a will for the US, you want to make sure that it remains inclusive of your estate planning in Canada and not exclusive. And typically, when people don't pay attention, they turn out making mistakes, and these are very costly mistakes, because if you revoke your fully structured Canadian will in favor of a basic will here done in the US for a simple US asset, then you could face all kinds of trouble. Blended families typically see devastations. Second marriages typically cause a lot of chaos. And this slide really came as an example because I dealt with one of those situations where Mr. Such and Such was supposed to be doing a will just for his US situated condo, a fit $500,000. And in fact, he revoked his Canadian will that dealt with $50 million going to his kids. And oh, behold, his girlfriend got the $50 million attributed to her. All this because somebody didn't pay attention to the cross-border mechanisms, making sure we don't eliminate or revoke Canadian wills for the simple purpose of a US will. And remember what I said a few minutes ago, there's absolutely there's no difference between your Canadian will and your US will. So, why have a secondary will drafted when you could use your Canadian will for probate purposes? The other big issue associated with Canadians owning in the US is the issue of incapacity. So people are not dead, but they unfortunately lose capacity to make legal decisions. Like this example reads, my parents own a condominium together in Florida, but they can't enjoy it anymore since my mom developed dementia. My dad couldn't sell the property because of my mom's condition, and so we had to do a costly and time-consuming Florida guardianship procedure. The appointment of a guardian is an expensive procedure. Now, although your Ontario Canadian wills are valid in the US, your power of attorneys and advanced healthcare directives are not. They're not only province-specific, but from a US perspective, they're also state-specific. And because the US, most US jurisdictions are title jurisdiction, title attorneys are very, very wary of transferring title based on a POA. And so we definitely don't want to get caught in a situation where incapacity occurs, because then the clients get stuck in expensive procedures. Unfortunately, after the guardianship is done, sometimes a few months, sometimes a couple of years later, the person passes away. Now we're back into probate. So we want to stay away from these types of situations that bring us to deal with foreign jurisdictions, foreign legal systems, cost and delays. So we want to stay away from it. One of the important aspects when people prepare estate planning documents, whether it's in Canada or the US, it's mostly to protect our beneficiaries, our children. So this slide reads as follows. We are worried about what happens to our kids after we pass away. What if our kids inherit our $300,000 home in Florida or Arizona, and then their business goes bankrupt? Can their creditor seize the house? Also, what if my son's wife divorces him? Will she get 50% of the property? And these are very, very key questions, because look, at the end of the day, most parents, that's all they want to do, protect their kids. And so we want to make sure we don't fall into traps. Now, why am I saying all this? Is because, when we have our kids in mind, we typically want to make sure we do anything and everything to protect them. So often enough, what you end up finding out is that, following a conversation by the pool or in the clubhouse and knowing about the intricacies of probate and incapacity, a lot of people find out the hard way that there's simple solutions to avoid probate in the US. And one of them is adding children on title. So you bought the property for, let's say, $200,000 when the market was soft in 2010. And fast forward to today, 2023, that property is worth $600,000. You find out that probate might be 5% of 600,000. That's a lot of money. Probate may take 2 years to complete, and you want to absolutely avoid probate. And your friend by the pool tells you, oh, well, you could just add your kids onto title. And if you add your kids onto title, if I take you back to the first slide where we said you could add your kids onto title as joint tenants with right of survivorship, well, in theory, if mom and dad pass away and 2 kids are on title as joint tenants with right of survivorship, the property will devolve to the children. So from a probate avoidance perspective, we achieve the objective. However, there's a tax ramification, both on the US side and on the Canadian side, that makes it such that such advice, which is cheap advice, ends up being extremely costly advice. Okay? And here it goes. Under US tax rules, when a non-resident transfers interest or US real estate to his children, he or she are subject to gift tax. We have an annual exclusion amount of $16,000 now. The balance of the transfer is going to be taxed at a rate between 18 and 40%. 40% hitting quite rapidly. So if mom and dad took a $600,000 home and carved it out between themselves and their 2 kids, that's effectively gifting each child $150,000. And when you factor in that each parent has about $16,000 of annual exclusion, we're probably looking at about $120,000 of taxable gift under US tax rules. Multiplied by 40%, it's about $60,000 each times 2, $120,000 US gift tax. Now, because most of us are Canadians and have Canadian tax obligations, adding your kids to title, if I look at the same scenario, will bring with it a deemed disposition under Canadian tax rules. Although the action of making a gift in Canada is tax-free, making the gift itself on an asset that is subject to a deemed disposition and subject to capital gains will trigger that capital gains of 25%, 26% to be more precise. So if we do the math, we have a purchase price of $200,000 in 2010. Probably at that time, the exchange rate is at par. And today it's worth $600,000 with a 35% exchange rate, right? Another $280,000. So we have a cost basis of $200 US or Canadian, and we have a fair market value in Canadian dollars of $880,000, which effectively gives us a $680,000 capital gain divided by 2. That's 340 divided by 2. That's $170,000 of taxable gains on that property. That's a lot of money. Now, there is the famous Canada-US tax treaty that says that where we have the same taxpayer in the same tax year paying the same type of tax, any taxes paid in the US, we can bring back to Canada as a foreign tax credit. Well, guess what? On the US side, we have gift tax. On the Canadian side, we have capital gains. We don't have a match. We have a mismatch. Therefore, effectively, we're probably looking in excess of $350,000 Canadian in capital gain tax and gift tax between the 2 countries if you add your children on title, assuming the fact pattern that I described. All this because you got some free advice by the pool. Now, most of you have kids. Most of you have kids, but I'm sure most of you don't have kids that pay for anything. Okay? And so the IRS is actually of the same opinion as you, and so is CRA. And therefore, despite the fact that your kids are getting property on their name on title, the CRA and IRS will both attribute those taxes to be payable by the donors or the gifters, which is mom and dad. And God forbid, if your daughter or son do get divorced, the next phone call you get is, Mommy, my husband doesn't love me anymore, but he'd love to take 50% of everything I have, including that famous condo you gifted to me. So we don't want that. This is, most of the time, snowbirds that they're a piece of paradise after a long, expensive, lifelong careers, hard work, and that's their that's their gift of paradise. That's a little piece of paradise. You don't want to jeopardize that for very, very poor free legal advice. So beware. We don't want you to get caught. We don't want you to make anything and make any decisions that will be expensive. We want you to get some advice from professionals that can help you and treat this for you and take you to the next level. And the next slide will discuss solutions. It doesn't mean that the solution that we're going to speak about is going to be the only solution available, but it's just one way of making sure that we could give you guys the necessary tools to, at the very least, to basically not make those mistakes. Okay, and I'm trying to get to the next slide, but for some reason, it's not happening for me. John, are you able to help me? There we go. Thank you, John. So, this solution called a cross-border trust is just one of many. Maybe we could go one back, John. It's just one of many solutions. The cross-border trust is great because it's a tool that we could utilize strictly for estate planning purposes. It's a tool that avoids probate. It's a tool that avoids incapacity, but it's a tool that maintains beneficial ownership in the hands of the purchasers or in the hands of the owners. Once assets go from the trust to your beneficiary, it provides with creditor proofing. Because the trust is a cross-border trust and it's ignored tax-wise, both on the US side and on the Canadian side, we always have the same taxpayer and we always have the same tax, which allows us to utilize fully the Canada-US tax treaty and avoid double taxation. And I'm just taking control. And one of the things that we like mostly about the trust is that if you already own and you think that you are worried about probate, we can still roll it into the trust without triggering a deemed disposition. Because again, we maintain the same beneficial owners and the trust is tax-wise is completely ignored. So we like that. Now, some Canadian clients like to use corporations, mainly because it's a cheaper tax structure, and therefore a lot of growth is typically happening with respect to their money in the corporation. So a lot of Canadians typically will come to us and say, look, I have money in a corporation I'd like to buy, and kind of share with you the potential issues associated with lending. But what's great about corporations, they don't die. They don't die, so there's no probate, they don't become incapacitated. The shareholder does, but the corporation itself will never die. So it avoids all these big issues. It also avoids US estate taxes, which we'll talk about in a few seconds briefly. It provides creditor protection when properly drafted. However, Canada has this taxable benefit rule on shareholders. So when a company owns real estate, but the shareholder utilizes the real estate for personal purposes in Florida, like as a snowbird, Canada typically likes to tax that benefit and it costs the taxpayer money. So we want to stay away from that. And here again, we want to make sure that you stay away from the double taxation and the LLC. We never want to see anybody in an LLC. Okay? Now, if you look at this slide quickly, it'll show you capital gains by ownership structure. And of course, in your name alone is the cheapest version. Trust and limited partnership do well, but corporations are more expensive. There's dividend taxes on top of the corporate taxes. And just look at the LLC. Where everywhere you're probably looking at 26, 27% plus dividend tax, the LLC are looking at 41 to 46% plus dividend tax, which could potentially take it to anywhere between 70 and 85% tax on every dollar earned by a Canadian who sells or generates a profit off LLC ownership. So we definitely want to stay away from that. Okay, Orlando, I'm just trying to see how we're doing on time because I know that we want to be respectful of people's time.
Are just 4 minutes after 8. So probably we'll open up soon. Joe, but
Okay.
let you wrap up.
Perfect. I'll just say that, Orlando and his team will have a copy of this presentation. They're going to be able to share that presentation with the attendees and those who registered for the webinar. So I'm just going to go quickly into what I think people need to know in order to just save time. Some people are buying, some people can't afford it anymore. The upkeep is expensive, so a lot of people choose to sell. Obviously, selling means you're going to have revenues, but selling means you need to get compliant, you need to get tax ID numbers, you need to make sure you file tax returns, you're going to pay taxes in Canada, you're going to pay taxes on the US side, you're going to pay taxes you're going to have withholding obligations on the US side as well. The US wants every foreign seller to leave 15% of the gross sale price on the side. These are potentially expensive mechanisms that Canadians are not necessarily familiar with. There's exceptions to that rule. You can petition the IRS to get some withholding applications. You can petition the IRS to eliminate the withholding if the property is sold for less than $300,000. But make sure you understand and know that avoiding the withholding doesn't eliminate your obligation to file tax return, doesn't eliminate the obligations for you to file and report your gains or losses to the IRS and to CRA. Okay? And the reason I'm telling you all this is because, there's challenges, right? So a lot of people want to sell because there was a seller's market at one point, because the upkeep costs were too expensive. So selling means what? Selling means you got to have closing costs. Selling means you got to have to pay capital gains, both in Canada and the US, and as Canadians on the exchange rate. Selling means also there's 15% of your your gross proceeds that go to the IRS pending your tax returns. So a lot of people get kind of turned off by having to sell. So what do? They move to renting. And renting is great. You get income, you can get US dollar income, so you're not subject to the exchange rate on your upkeep. However, you still have to pay taxes, you still have to file taxes, both in Canada and the US and on the exchange rate. But here's something very interesting. Every time you rent, you absolutely must depreciate the value of your real estate. And when you go to sell, that depreciation gets recaptured, therefore increasing your capital gains exposure both in Canada and the US. But here's something very interesting also. When you rent your place, you're opening up the door for liability. And by opening up the door for liability, you're exposing yourself. And there's not enough insurance in the US. You're going to need to get umbrella coverage. You're going to and still get exposed. And typically, we recommend having ownership structures and so on and so forth. So you want to stay away from this type of challenges. So why am I telling you all this? Is because people that are trying to offset the cost of the exchange rate, or people that bought when the market was very low at par, and today see that the value of the properties is maybe double, tripled, and the exchange is at 35%. There's an opportunity to refinance with RBC Bank USA. By refinancing and extracting at least your equity, there's no capital gains. If you take that money and you convert it into Canadian dollars, still no capital gains. If you take that money and you send it to Canada, no FERPTA withholding. Now let's play this game. If you borrow, let's say 5%, and you took your equity and gave it to your money manager in Canada, and he or she, turned 5 or 6 or 7 or 8% profit on that money. Well, what is your cost of borrowing? Well, it's whatever you pay to RBC Bank plus minus your profits. Therefore, the systems say that when you borrow for the purpose of investing, you could deduct your cost of borrowing from your profits. So effectively, when you borrow money from RBC Bank, but your money manager is turning profits for you, your borrowing rate or your cost of borrowing becomes zero. How much tax have you paid on that? Zero. How much capital gains or exchange rate did you pay on that? Zero. How much withholding on that? Zero. And more importantly, I think Orlando in his surveys asked if people had snow out their windows. Lifestyle. You get to keep your lifestyle as opposed to renting where you don't have access to your property or altogether selling. And because RBC Bank has an amazing product, and I think Anne did an amazing job describing it, and there's no prepayment penalties, this becomes a win-win-win. It allows everybody to hedge against the currency, avoid the tax liability, and maintain the lifestyle. So we want to make sure people don't get caught in that trap, okay? U.S. estate taxes, the only thing I'm going to say about U.S. estate taxes is they do apply to Canadians. There are very important thresholds in Canada for Canadians, despite having U.S. estate tax liability. There's a mistake on the slide. Currently, the exemption is $12.96 million, almost $13 million US. So very little to worry about if you are married, and even though you could be an ultra high net worth individual with the exemptions in place and the marital credits for married couples, we're looking at $26-27 million USD of exemption with exchange rates like $1 trillion Canadian dollars. So there's very little to worry about when it comes to U.S. estate tax. However, if you feel that there's a need to have a discussion about U.S. estate tax, feel free to visit our website. There's a U.S. estate tax calculator, or have contact Orlando's team, and they could put you in touch with us, and we could do a fairly quickly U.S. estate tax analysis. Okay. Last thing I want to talk about is how many days are Canadians allowed to spend in the U.S.? Okay, and that seems to be a very controversial question. I want to go off the bat and say there's two questions when we speak about number of days staying in the U.S. The first is an immigration question, and the regulation typically grants Canadian a B2 visitor tourist visa for up to 180 days, typically in a cycle of 365 days, and provided that you can demonstrate that to an officer that your habitual abode is Canada. The 180 is a symbolic date. A lot of border officers stick to it, but there's nothing in the regulation that speaks specifically about number of days for Canadians specific to being 180 days. However, the next question makes things more complicated. It's the question about taxation. The question about taxation renders the calculation of 180 days more firm. Some people want to stay more. There are possibilities to extend your visa. You file Form I-539, you do biometrics, and you can stay beyond 180 days. And provided that that visa is granted to you, it's not an automatic approval. It needs to be reviewed and granted to you, but provided that it is, you're typically able to stay in the U.S. more than 180 days. However, two big howevers. There's this tax ramification on the Canadian side. What happens when you spend more than 182 days abroad from Canada, right? That's one. Same ramifications. What happens if you stay more than 182 days on the U.S. side from a U.S. tax perspective? And more importantly, what happens to your OHIP from a Canadian perspective when you spend more than 7 months out of the province? And so we want to make sure that people do not make mistakes. The magic number of staying in the U.S. or outside in the U.S. every year, based on Form 8840, the Closer Connection Form, and the Substantial Presence Test, the magic number is 120 days. But most snowbirds like to stay 180. Is that a problem? The answer is no. Provided you stay year in and year out 180 days, and provided you file Form 8840, which is choosing a closer connection to Canada, you should be okay, and you will not be deemed a U.S. tax resident. Why don't we want to be deemed U.S. tax residents? Because if you're deemed a U.S. tax resident, you got to declare your worldwide income to the U.S. So your investment account, your real estate, your job income from Canada needs to now be declared on a U.S. tax reform. So we want to avoid that. Now, for those who end up spending more than 182 physical days per year, you can still take the closer connection. You can still file U.S. tax returns, taking the treaty-based position, and make sure that Canada remains your tax residency. Of course, those that will end up spending 190, 200, 210 days, you need to make sure you are okay from a healthcare perspective. Okay? Here again on our website, if you have concerns already for 2022, which is the substantial presence test. You can go on our website, you can punch in the number of days, and the system will tell you, the software will tell you whether or not you need to file a closer connection form or whether you're okay. Okay. So our website has a lot of resources. Because of the way we're structured, because we're both Canadian and US attorneys, because we have offices on both sides of the border, because of our expertise, we're not only able to analyze and make recommendations, but we could actually implement some of those recommendations, some of this advice. Anybody who is registered to this webinar, anybody who is attending is free to utilize our external partnership program with RBC Bank and RBC Canada, where all RBC clients get a free consultation with us about their tax, estate planning, and cross-border needs. And so if you feel you have any questions that you want to address, there's going to be a Q&A in a couple of seconds. But if you feel that there's more pressing matters or more personal matters or more fact-driven matters, feel free to reach our office and you will be granted a completely free courtesy consultation so we can help you with your needs. And there'd be no cost to you unless there's a decision to implement certain strategies based on your needs. And with that, I turn it back to Orlando. I thank you for your patience and for sitting through this, and I'd be happy to answer any questions that may come along.
Wow. So I gave everybody forewarning that we were, there was going to be turbulence. You took them till probably 15,000 feet above. I think everybody held on. I was taking a look and they held on. They had their seatbelts on. So we've got a question I'm going to open up.
I think that, as I mentioned, and the objective wasn't to freak anybody out, but the reality is that LLCs do cause double taxation and they do cause aggravation. If your property is rented out and you're properly taking depreciation, you haven't seen the issues yet other than refusal from RBC. But if you ever sold this property, there'd be severe tax hurt. That being said, there are solutions. I don't know how efficient they are. I'd have to review more carefully your fact pattern, but there could be solutions that we could implement. And if we implement them right, because of my long-standing relationship with RBC and having worked with the bank in the better part of the last 20 years, there may be an opportunity of reorganizing the structure so that even RBC is willing to lend you or to help you refinance that same property. So all I would say is feel free, Chaz, to maybe contact our office and book a consult, and we'll go into details about the history of your property, the ownership structure, and then we'll hopefully be in a position to make some recommendations that will not only take you out of the tax trouble, but who knows, maybe even generate some structure that will be satisfactory to RBC, and they'll be willing to lend you on the existing property.
Sounds good. Thank you so much, Steve.
Thank you.
Thank you for joining, Chaz, and appreciate it.
My pleasure.
Yeah, your question. And let me see if there is. While I'm just keeping an eye to see if there's any other questions, I'm also going to just share here. So again, don't hesitate. Any question is welcome.
So thank you for the question. So all mortgages in the US are open. So it's not just RBC Bank. So the mortgage is open. And so, but the rate is locked in for whatever term you choose. So you've got the security of that rate being locked in. And there is no, we just offer those two different products, like the mortgage option or that home equity line of credit option. So I would say our rates are comparable to other institutions that are in the US. and it's not a disadvantage for it to be open. So yes, so high fives, I would say we're in today. High, like around 5.8 is what I was seeing today for a short term, to about 5.25 for a longer term.
Thank you, though, Leighton, as always.
All
Appreciate
right.
you joining.
Thanks.
And I'm going to unmute your question. Thank you.
I guess I'll take this one. It could have an effect. It could have an effect if you move to the U.S. and were strictly a U.S. taxpayer. Then obviously you don't have to worry about the Canadian tax system, and therefore maybe an LLC, which is a very simple and sought after tool, could work for you. Or maybe a simple US revocable trust helps. But the challenges are twofold. What is your immigration path to the US, first and foremost? And second of all, how do you terminate Canadian residency? And obviously that could be a presentation on its own on terminating Canadian residency and the some of the fallout of telling Canada, I no longer want to be taxable here in Canada. So yes, in theory, it could have an impact, but typically most immigration vehicles that are granted to Canadians like myself and yourself are temporary in reach. So typically they're TN visas or their investor category visas, which don't have immigration intent, which means that you're good for a certain period and then you got to go back home. And if that's the case, you always want to keep the Canadian tax system in sight when structuring your ownership structures. Hope that helps.
Thank you, Marguerite. And we've got
Well, yeah, there's the reason we have it is that it's a very popular structure for people buying in the US through corporations, where the money is sitting in, let's say, a holding company. And the reason being is that your holding company has a bunch of assets, typically. So you don't want to have, let's say, a rental property that could expose you to liability held by a Canadian corporation that may have millions of dollars in it or hundreds of thousands of dollars in it. Because if tomorrow something went wrong in that rental property and there was a lawsuit, everything becomes up for grabs. So we create tiered corporate structures for two reasons. One is to segregate the assets. Two, moving the playing field to the US in terms of taxation, in terms of withholdings, and so on and so forth, to avoid a lot of aggravation to Canadians. Unfortunately, the tax system in Canada is such that it's making things harder and harder by the day to properly structure for Canadians. And again, this is a very unique ownership structure because typically, if RBC were to be involved, they typically wouldn't want to land on that structure because there's too many layers. So again, it's stuff we see. Again, it's stuff that we see. It's stuff that is typically not necessarily off the cuff, but it's stuff that needs to be addressed in some cases. So that's why we had it in there. But these are not the only structures. We were restricted in time, as you could imagine. I could speak about these topics for the next 3 days and not lose a beat, but we have to pick and choose what's the generic stuff that we can put in there just to kind of give the clients and the attendees direction into where we think there's issues and solutions.
Thank you, Steve.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Cardine. And with that, I do want to say that, from this conversation, the intent is not to suggest by any means that everyone, should go off and buy properties in the U.S. or, in Florida or other places. The idea about real estate outside the country or retirement outside needs to be looked at in the context of your own situation, family connections, family obligations. But why we've done this conversation, because it is something that has been risen by clients and individuals to explore. So, whichever one you choose, we want to be able to help you navigate it in an informed way. That's the bottom line. And we have the resources and the team and the network to help and facilitate that. Some of the other conversations that we're going to be having for the rest of the year, next month, I'm going to be focusing on a webinar on women wired to invest. And in April, we're touching on real estate more on the Canadian side, navigating higher rates, lower home prices, and then looking in May how to invest with impact just beyond financial returns. The amount of information that you've gotten today, my suggestion, the call to action is to not hesitate in reaching out to myself, anyone that was on this webinar today. We are here to collaborate and to assist you in navigating what you're trying to achieve in the long run. I'm always open to having a conversation and you know, my own experience, my own knowledge, help with that strategy. And as you can see, there are times where we need to pull in other individuals to assist. So continue to attend these webinars, continue to learn, because as was very obvious, the learning never really ends, right? And this is the process that I take individuals through. The key point of all these webinars is focusing on education, empowerment, and execution. So with this information, well, what do you do with it? What next, right? So, you know, using that information to improve where you're at. There's a few questions that came up. Individuals already own property, and you've got the ability to reach out and then actually get to improve the structure of what you've done. And the process, I've got the process that we use here at RBC. Want to assess where you're at financially, where you're trying to get, and then provide informed, you know, advice. It's been a pleasure and a privilege to really have the knowledge that was on this panel. Ozzy and Steve, I can't thank you enough for taking the time to share your information, your knowledge with clients, with, you know, individuals that joined from the community and myself. You know, it's really been a pleasure working with you and putting this on, and certainly thank you very much. Appreciate that. So with that, I will sort of close it here. Thank you again. I'll hang around for a bit. Like I said, you may have more questions that came up. I'd encourage everybody to take notes. I'm sure you're going to review your notes. Don't hesitate, shoot an email. You can also include stuff in the survey that we're going to send out. And with that, good night. Stay safe, stay warm. And I'll just hang around for a bit in case anybody else has any other questions.
Thank you.
Thank you, Leslie. Thanks, Anne. Thanks, Steve.
Thank you.